just recording on then, Sam?
Yeah, it's we've started to record.
Oh, just on. There we are. Welcome everybody to the Economy, Environment and Infrastructure PDC, Thursday the 21st of January. I'd like to welcome, I can see Mark Thomas, our Cabinet Member, is in. Stuart Davis, who's going to be presenting, and Martin Nichols. I don't know who JB is, so apologies. Oh, it's June. Sorry, June. Right. Get on with the agenda first then. Any apologies, Sam?
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Miles Langstone.
Okay, thank you. Receive any disclosure, personal or prejudicial interest from the members? None?
No.
On to the minutes of the previous meeting for accuracy. Page 1, page 2, page 3. Can I have a proposer?
Yeah, I move, Chair.
To record? Okay. Go on to item 4.
Sorry, Chair, I don't know. I can hear somebody talking in the background.
Can I
I
have?
don't know if anybody else can.
Okay, can I
have my hand up?
Mute your mics, please. Peter, have you got a?
I have my hand up, Chair. Sorry, matters were moving so quickly. I wanted to comment under item 2, disclosures of personal and prejudicial interest, rather to ask a question. I mean, this committee now, of course, includes environment within its overall responsibility. And I, of course, chair the Natural Environment Scrutiny Performance Panel. And I'm just wondering for advice, given that that scrutiny panel actually has a responsibility for monitoring, commenting on environment policy development, how that fits with my being a member of this committee. I'd like advice, legal advice, please.
Okay. Legal, can
yeah,
advice, please.
PC. Yeah, I think you'll be okay with it, because if you look at section 12, what it says that it won't be regarded a prejudicial interest in any business where that business relates to another public authority or body exercising functions of a public nature in which you hold a position or general control or management.
So there's no conflict of interest?
No, I think you're fine.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Peter, thanks. Right, item 4. Stuart Davis is presenting this strategy.
I'll introduce in. I think, Phil, are you there in terms of to take through? But yeah, I'll just introduce. Obviously, this was requested as part of the sustainability agenda that we're taking forward. So transport was one of the key sort of strands within that, the sustainable transport strategy. So we were asked to come to the committee with a report on this. So Phil, do you want to take through on the key items?
Yeah, certainly. Hello all. My name is Phil John. I'm a project manager within Highways. And as Stuart has just said, as part of the motion of notice that we made around climate change, we looked at all the work that was outstanding that we had to do. We reviewed a lot of policies, and then that highlighted the fact that we didn't have a sustainable transport strategy policy. So what we're proposing is that we develop this policy, and that's been accepted previously. What we want to highlight to yourself is the work that's involved in this part. The first, I mean, we've looked at it from two angles. The first target being Swansea's aim to become carbon-free itself as a council by 2030. And then the second part, which is separate, is the wider Swansea 2050 target. This report actually focuses on the 2030 aspect, and it brings together those parts of the work which we are currently doing, which we think will contribute towards the 2030 target of Swansea as a council being carbon free. So we're looking at what we're calling work stream 1. What we're proposing to do is, within this sustainable transport policies, to bring in 3 areas of work that are already underway to some extent, and that is our green fleet, our business travel review, and the LED lighting replacement programme. They're at, as you can see in 2.2, they're at different stages of completion, if you like. Green Fleet has a policy, and that's attached as an appendix to this report, and the work is well underway on that. The business travel review is a piece of work which we started back in 2018-19, and that's looked at staff travel and has proposed some recommendations, but we don't have a policy on it as yet. And the LED lighting is one where the work is significantly underway. It's about 80% of the way through, but again, we don't have a policy. What we're proposing is to develop all 3 of these themes and bring them together into this one sustainable transport policy. If I go briefly through each of these, I'm sure Stuart and Martin will help me field any questions you may have as we go along. So in terms of Green Fleet, the Green Fleet strategy, like I say, is most complete in as much as it has a policy and the work is underway. We've set a target of approximately a reduction of approximately 5% each year for emissions, and that would give us a 50% reduction by 2030. What we would like to do is incorporate the Green Fleet policy within the sustainable transport policy and stick to the current timeline, which is a 3-year review, and that would make it due for review by yourselves at the end of 2021 or early in 2022. So that would be our first recommendation. Any questions on the Green Fleet? Okay, so in terms of
1 minute, Phil.
Yeah.
Jones has a question.
yeah, certainly.
You're on mute, Peter. Peter, you're on mute. There we are.
Hope it holds this time. These things come and go, they jump up and down. I'll try again. With reference to paragraph 3.2 in the report under the Green Fleet heading, we're told that, as you think you've mentioned, there's a target for a 5% per annum reduction in carbon emissions from council vehicles. Now this would result in a 50% reduction by 2030. Could you just clarify for me, what is the baseline from which you are taking these measurements? In other words, to what extent, as in 2018, presumably, the vehicle fleet was already green, to use that term, and therefore, are we talking about 5% annual reduction from a fleet that's already partly green, or a 5% reduction from a fleet that was totally dependent on fossil fuels? And hence, what would be the 50% reduction by 2030 a reduction from? Thank you.
Yeah. Phil, I think Martin wants to come in here first.
Yeah, certainly. No, that's fine. I don't have the answer for this one.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Peter. I'll give it a go. Yeah, so the baseline figure when the original strategy was developed, Peter, would have been 2016-17 emissions, because obviously the policy was drafted and agreed in 2018. So we're generally a sort of 6 months to a year behind when we use baseline figures. We can confirm that the report is attached. I haven't scanned through the appendix, which is attached. I'm pretty certain it does say in there. And in that strategy, it referred to the 5% year on year. Now, as you've probably worked out, if you took it from 2018 to 2030, it's actually 12 years, not 10 years. but it's a crude enough sort of straight line reduction against the original emissions that we'd set out in the 2018 report. What we have done, and it may not be factually correct in terms of the numbers, is taken the current emissions when referring in this report to the 50% further reduction. So it's probably slightly should have been clarified that the original 50% was against the emissions in 2016-17. But what we are saying is, for the assumption of this report, we're using a 50% reduction from the 18-19 baseline, which would have been obviously the last full year we have before the report went to council in December. We can clarify the exact numbers on that, but that's the principle we've adopted.
Okay, thank you. So what proportion of the fleet, assuming we reach our 5% per annum reduction, what percentage of the fleet by 2030 would be no longer dependent on fossil fuels, i.e. green?
That's a difficult question to answer because of the disproportionate usage of heavy goods vehicles in terms of things like refuse fleet, etc., accounting for a much larger proportion of the emissions. So it's not a straight numbers game. So in year one, we were able to achieve that 5% reduction by bringing in a fleet of 45, I think it was, EV vehicles, the largest EV fleet in Wales. But of course, they were all small vans, which are readily available on the market and are comparable in terms of cost and provide equivalent service use. The problem that we have at the moment is to make the overall reduction of 50% by 2030, we'll need a significant improvement in both EV vehicles for heavy goods, or more likely a hydrogen solution for heavy goods, which is where we're effectively heading. So it isn't going to be a straight line, but on average, we would need to achieve 5% year on year. And we believe with the way technology is changing and with the UK government and Welsh government's commitment to removal of all diesel and petrol cars and vans, that the market will respond positively, allowing us to bring those heavier goods vehicles on, giving us a greater reduction quicker.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I've got three other hands up, but Stuart Davis, you'd like to come in?
Yeah, just to emphasise on that, really, there is a bit of a lag in the market because it hasn't responded on the heavier vehicles to date, but there's a real belief that following the kind of, some of the kind of statements in terms of to stop producing and selling diesel and petrol vehicles, is going to be a real acceleration in the sort of rate of development of the technology. And as Martin was saying, our biggest challenges are the larger using sort of vehicles in terms of the heavier vehicles. And, certainly to date, and the sort of confidence in terms of electric being a solution for that isn't so great at the moment, but there's certainly a significant sort of growth in interest in developing hydrogen. And, although it's 5% reduction at the moment, it wouldn't surprise me if it won't be a straight line in terms of the achievement for that, but it wouldn't surprise me when we're getting towards that it'll start to accelerate at a much greater pace. So.
Well, that's answered one of my questions, Stuart, because I was going to ask on hydrogen. I see a cabinet member, Mark Thomas, wants to come in. I know I've got June, Mike White on hold at the moment, but Mark, you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think, if I can put Peter's mind at ease on this, I mean, if you look back, I haven't got the policy in front of me, but if you look at the policy, it says that the reason we put in only 5% is because of the things that Martin and Stuart has alluded to. Our purpose and intent is to green our entire fleet. That is our stated aim. The reason we can't, and the reason we had to be conservative with a 5% change year on year, was because of the comments that Stuart and Martin made. Currently, there is not the availability to green the entire fleet. These vehicles don't exist for the uses we would have of them. Now, Andrea, as we know, Councillor Andrea Lewis, is working very closely, certainly on the hydrogen side of things, and that's something that she is very active in and looking to do, because that appears to be especially for these heavy goods vehicles, refuse vehicles and our platforms and things like that, road sweepers and the big machines, that is probably going to be the most sensible route. Electric doesn't seem to be able to qualify them. So I definitely believe that, we will exceed the 50% target that is in this policy. It's just that it's technology that, if anything holds it back, Peter, it's not a lack of will. It will be a lack of available technology to do it. So the determination is clearly there to do it, but it's, as I said, I think we will exceed by 2030. There'll be more than 50% of our fleet on green alternative uses.
Thank you, Mark. Ladies first, can I call June Burtonshaw, please?
Thank you, Chairman. It's under 1.3 in the report on the number of employees using their own private vehicles on council business. Do we have an idea of how many there are? And two, if it is not going to be part of the scope, will we have any incentive or assistance to them to change their vehicles?
Stuart, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, certainly that's been picked up really through the kind of grey fleet element, the review work that was carried out with that. We had some fairly detailed analysis of the sort of staff travel, and recognised that even part of the sort of the carbon emissions and the mileage travelled and the environmental cost of it was because some of them had older vehicles and different things in that. So we did go quite far down the route of sort of developing an approach, which was to sort of review the deployment of electric vehicles, sort of car club schemes and different things on there. Obviously, the COVID has kind of sort of put a spanner in the works in terms of the rate of deployment and things there, but we have got an approach that we're working at, which certainly recognises that, how we provide the appropriate vehicles in terms of, I guess there's a very much a defined kind of hierarchy, which is really firstly to try and eliminate the need to travel altogether where possible, and certainly some of it might be by exactly what we've ended up doing at a pace, the sort of technology for meetings and things where avoiding the need to travel. Then it's looking at the types of travel and working on a hierarchy from active travel and sustainable modes, the bus, etc., down to car clubs and pool cars, with sort of private use of vehicle being really down at the bottom of the hierarchy. So that is something that, as I say, a little bit in the next sections of the report, Phil will be touching on, but it's certainly part of the approach, because it's a significant cost and a significant carbon contributor really for the authority.
Thanks, Stuart. Is that okay, June? Answered your questions?
Stuart.
Cheers. Mike White, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Mainly, obviously, the first point I want to raise has obviously been raised, by Peter with the larger vehicles, but do we know exactly how many vehicles that we own or lease within the fleet? And how many of them would we expect to be within the actual green fleet once we get converted over? Because as you know, we have quite a lot of pool cars. So would you know exactly how many that we would actually would have using the actual green fleet policy?
Thank you, Mike. I think I'll Martin. I'll give Stuart a break, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So at the last count, it does change quite regularly. The total fleet was around about 750 vehicles. Now that covers a complete range from everything from pool cars, small vans, large vans, buses for social services use, etc., and refuse fleet. So it's a very, very broad range. All of the fleet is covered by the Green Fleet policy. So whenever any vehicle is renewed by lease or purchase, then Mark Barrow, who's responsible for administering the policy and the fleet, will go through the Green Fleet policy and identify all options and opportunities to be able to go to a full zero carbon vehicle, so a full EV if it's available. But if it's not available, he will explore then down the hierarchy in terms of hybrids, etc., to try and find any options and opportunities that present a reduction. So as to how many vehicles would end up being completely green, I think for the answers we gave earlier, it would be impossible to say at this stage. And it's not as crude as saying it's 50% of those, because as we said, the HGV ones would obviously have a disproportional usage. So, but you know, clearly in a fleet of that size, you've got to make significant inroads and probably get to well over half of that number on a strict either straight EV or hydrogen to be able to get to those targets. The reality is we're aiming for 100% if we can, if the technology keeps pace with what we are trying to achieve. So the 50% I'd like to think is a minimum for the reasons I think Stuart Davis mentioned earlier.
Perhaps we could take that forward on a further date on a PDC, Mike.
Yes, great. Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Martin.
Before I go to Stuart, Phil Downing has had his hand up for a while. So Phil, come in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just on the green fleet, I know it's a big challenge for us when we get to the larger vehicles, but also as we're moving up the scale, at this moment in time, I think the vehicles we've got have got to go back to Cumbulla to be charged every night. We haven't got charging stations. So if we go to any of the larger vehicles, I'm not on about the rubbish ones, but the ones in between where we could get away with electric, then we would have to have charging points around the county. Also, looking at hydrogen, even with hydrogen, we'd have to have refill points. Otherwise, everything will have to come back and forth to Swansea, which would be defeating the object. So, yeah, that's all I got to say on the vehicle side of it.
Yeah.
One thing with June is on about the green fleet. I think we'd be looking at because there isn't a policy at the moment, and I think that will take a while for us to get our teeth into.
Yeah, going on from what Phil just said now with the hydrogen. I know in the near future we moving from Pipehouse Wharf to somewhere else. I'm wondering if we could get that hydrogen facility, or is that too much of a ask at the moment?
I'll start on it. Martin will certainly, I'm sure, come in on some of this. It is one of the big challenges, I guess, even with EV, to make sure that there's the appropriate number of charging points in the right places, even with the small vehicle fleet. It also throws up some other tensions. You know, some staff go, for example, straight from home in terms of to work, so it's how it's dealt with there. So, you know, not all people have got sort of off-street charging, and there might be challenges with things like that. So there are a number of things in terms of the infrastructure. If we just take EV alone, that it's making sure we've got the right points in the right places to service the demand, and where the vehicles are being deployed from, how they're being run, what distances they're travelling. You know, range isn't really generally a challenge in terms, even for existing EV vehicles at the moment. But there's acknowledgement, things like you've got challenges in the winter where the heaters, for example, in the vehicle do take more sort of charge out of the system. When it gets to hydrogen, I know certainly we will be moving, you know, in two sort of phases from Pipehouse, but the hydrogen facilities, the development of hydrogen isn't quite there at the moment, and the vehicles are extremely expensive in terms of on there. Well, I guess they've gone from hideously expensive in the last couple of years to extremely expensive now. I think it was initially a couple of years ago, certainly it was about £1 million for a bus. Now I think it's something like double the cost, where a traditional bus would be about 160. I think they're about 300 to 350 for a hydrogen bus at the moment. But it is very much acknowledged that in order to get to the stage, and I guess it's back to the question that Councillor Jones asked at the beginning, you know, it's it's back to that thing of, as the technology comes forward and the infrastructure comes forward, it's going to be that sort of enable us to go on a much more sort of exponential curve, hopefully, of replacements. But I'll let Martin come in and I'll stop rambling.
Okay, Matt.
Oh,
You're on
mute.
mute, Martin. You're on mute, mate.
Apologies for that. Yeah, just to add to what Stuart has said, Councillor Downing's right. The current charging points are predominantly based or within the depots on our council buildings. And as Stuart has said, because a number of our employees currently take vehicles home, then in reality, it seems counterintuitive to reduce the emissions by allowing them to travel directly to site, but then forcing them to have to drive into the depot to charge up the vehicle, or to bring their own vehicle into the depot to collect their EV vehicle and drive the other way. So there are some logistical challenges. One consideration would be, which we haven't done yet, would the council invest in home charging kits for our employees, for them to take the vehicles home and therefore charge them at home, thus reducing the need for us to have large-scale charging, because that in itself is a challenge. For example, in Halagorse depot, where the larger amount of EV vehicles are based, we're at the absolute capacity of the grid system there. So to increase the vehicles further, we would have to spend a considerable amount of money upgrading the electricity system there to allow it to take more vehicles. So we've got to look at the balance about whether or not, in the absence of enough on-street charging, whether we are prepared to say, look, there's a compromise, and perhaps the employee pays a proportional cost towards home charging. So those are some of the things I think we need to look at as part of the next review of the Green Fleet policy, assuming the committee endorse it coming back at the end of the year. The larger vehicles are slightly different because everything that's covered under the O licence has to be parked up by law in a recognised location, recognised depot. So there are limited options for those vehicles. They have to be returned there. But as you'll know, we currently have a fueling station in Pipehouse Wharf. Unfortunately, I think Stuart referred to the cost of hydrogen buses being what used to be hideously expensive. I can assure you the cost of a hydrogen fueling station is more than hideously expensive, and it is not something the council could fund. But it is going to require the market, both in terms of those producing the vehicles and in terms of all of your current fueling stations, the Shells and your BP of this world, to realise that they have to make a noticeable shift from just selling petrol to EV charging stations. And I've seen the first few start to spring up, but then in subsequently hydrogen fueling stations. And we have had some good discussions with some of the national players in that field to see whether we can explore that as part of our City Deal projects, and certainly roll out that hydrogen opportunity sooner rather than later, as soon as the technology allows.
Thank you, Martin. Philly wants to come back in.
Yeah, this is just something that just came to me while you were talking. It would be a good thing if the council built a PV farm just to charge our vehicles, so we could have a centre where all our vehicles would go, and we'll do it all in house. Don't mention the price now, Martin.
T. John comes to price.
I wasn't going to mention the price, actually. I was going to remind members that we are building a PV farm, as members will know. Again, it's about location, isn't it? Is that you've got to weigh up the challenge of then driving all your vehicles to one location to refuel, whether it be hydrogen or EV. But I think, you know, there are a lot of community charging schemes springing up. So, you know, you have a lot of these where you have sort of rain canopies within supermarkets, for example, where we all walk under with our shopping trolleys. Actually, there are examples now where they are covered in PV panels with charging points immediately below. So when you go to get your shopping, when you're allowed to go out and you go get your shopping, you plug your EV charger in while you're there at the same time. And I think it needs that sort of response, particularly from things like supermarkets. And we're already enabling a lot of our new car parks to be able to accommodate this as well, because it's got to be part of the normal business for people to charge. Because, you know, you can refuel a car up in 5 minutes. People need to be able to have the convenience of EV charging, and it's making that accessible network of charge points, which again may be something as part of this discussion you would want us to bring back to have a look at our current aspirations for a network of EV charge points across the city.
Yeah, correct. I think that's something that we can fetch back to PDC. Phil, is there any more questions? No? Phil would like to carry on.
No,
Apologies, Chair. I think
Councillor
Paxton Hood has got his hand up.
Oh, sorry. Paxton, sorry, mate.
That's all right, Chairman. It's all right. I'm used to it. Don't worry about it. Carrying on this discussion, and it's obviously a big topic anyway, but in terms of the charging infrastructure, is there any talks going on either nationally and in Wales or UK in terms of putting in structures, particularly where we're looking at places where people will not be able to fit their own charging systems? I'm thinking of various places in Swansea, and I certainly got a couple in my ward where it wouldn't be possible for the residents to fit their own charging points, and they would need some sort of infrastructure. If we're going to go down that route, I'm just wondering if there's any plans in that respect.
Sorry, if I could just come in terms of on that again, it's something that we're waiting for the market to come through with sort of fully on there. There are some authorities who've been trialling almost like feeders off, lighting networks, so they're sort of curbside rather than the house. It's for example, if for those living in, say, terrace properties, they can't run a cable across the footway. So, there are certain measures like that. I think the other unknown, really, when we look at charging infrastructure is how quick vehicles charge. It's how much, for example, how much effort you'd go to putting in these chargers at home for people, when if they've got the really fast chargers in which they're looking at in some, for example, trunk road main route networks, you can go to, I think, something like a 90% charge in about 20 minutes or something. So it depends how much you put in terms of putting the infrastructure at home, depending what the market and the rest of the charger points are going to be across the network. So I think it's, as I say, we're waiting for kind of technology and things to advance, and all the way through from charging technology to charging infrastructure to see how it's best managed. Because you could be going to an awful lot of expense of putting, for example, charging networks in, and some of the challenges that Martin mentioned about, which is network capacity outside people's homes, when they could literally once a week or something just be charging up in a supercharger station for 20 minutes or whatever. So then that's the unknown with it, really.
Thank you for that, Stuart, but obviously it does need to be a national strategy, I guess, which we would want to fit into in that sense. I was just wondering whether there was any talk about it at this point in time and whether there's consideration be given to it.
Yeah, I think certainly they looked, whilst government are looking at the sort of charging points across sort of Wales, where it needs to be strategically, and that's being looked at all levels through from home charging all the way up. So I think those discussions are ongoing in terms of for seeing how it's best managed and how they develop, I guess, national policy and policy guidance. So even when it comes, for example, to planning measures when they're putting in new developments about what the requirements are for charging points, etc.
I guess there's no timescales on this yet, no?
No, it's emerging as technology allows, really.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Mark, what's coming back in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. On this specific point, yeah, myself and Councillor Lewis are looking at whether or not we can put in funding bids to Welsh Government. There is a strategy out there. It may not be, it's not about necessarily looking at putting them at people's houses or where individuals live, because the infrastructure required to do all of that would be massive. It's more about higher footfall areas. So we are currently looking at the possibility of seeking funding for things like car parks, particularly, in certain areas where council-owned car parks, where we could put in possibly EV charges through Welsh Government funding, and because you'd want to put them where they would get a relative good use as well, you know. So a car park would be a communal point where it would attract perhaps numbers of people to use them, because it's all about usage and spreading that opportunity. So at the moment, that's the sort of area that we're looking at or focusing in, would be sort of communal car parks, but on council-owned property, obviously.
Can I just come back on that a little bit, if I may, just to say that one of the community councils on which I remember, we are seriously looking at the option of putting in 1 or 2 charging points in the recreational hall car park, to be honest, for residents to use as and when they attend, or when people attend those meetings at that place. Well, that remains to be seen. And it's not a cheap business, and certainly we would be interested to know if there were any grants available for doing that.
Okay. No further questions. Phil, you'd like to carry on with your presentation?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Chair. So we'll move on to the business travel review. Essentially, this is staff travel, where they use their own cars to undertake council business as part of a working day, and then they're reimbursed by mileage claims. In 2018, we had a review of our staff travel, and that did flag up. And I'll be honest, it was as much for financial purposes as carbon reduction at that time. But it did flag up that we were doing in excess of 2.5 million miles per year in our own vehicles. It's widely recognised across the whole country that this isn't best practice, because of the uncontrolled nature of it. And there are various other risks as well where staff are using their own vehicles. The associated financial cost with all that travel was in the region of £1.2 million and 700 tonnes of greenhouse gases. The review came back with a number of recommendations which would move us away from that position, and we did start considering them and took this to leadership team, etc. And managers indeed did start trying to discourage staff from using their own vehicles where possible. What the review came back and recommended was that we introduce a travel hierarchy to reduce our grey fleet miles. Essentially, that is where you discourage staff from using their own vehicles by providing things like car clubs or better pool cars for them, promoting the need to travel by bus, public transport, etc., by avoiding the need to travel, which again is something which has been greatly emphasised now with the whole COVID situation, and that's kind of pushed us a lot quicker down that route than I think we would ever have got to otherwise. So, but what has changed, what COVID has changed incredibly as well for us, is that the whole operating model for bringing in something like a car club does depend upon there being a hub where people are working from. As Stuart said earlier, you wouldn't want people to drive to a building just to pick up a pool car and then go off to do their business. So our recommendation at the moment with this is for us to understand what the council's future operating model is going to look like. And by that, I mean in terms of civic buildings, public, and our offices, where will we be based? If it's going to be more city centre based with other organisations, then clearly something like a car club would have legs, and we could look to incorporate that across all organisations that share the building. It's just a case of how and when we understand what that looks like, and then we take these recommendations and see, can we apply them to the future model, and is that going to be good for all partners involved if that is the case? So our recommendations from this essentially is that we include the grey fleet policy within the sustainable transport policy, but as part of developing that policy, we come back to yourselves with recommendations and for further steer as this work develops and as we understand what operating model we have and how we can address travel within that.
Thank you, Phil. Any questions regarding the grey fleet? No? Peter Jones.
Oh, thank you, Chair. And thank you for that presentation, which was helpful. But a question relating, I mean, we're talking obviously about staff and staff travel, as you rightly reminded us. Do we know what proportion of our staff normally use their own vehicles, their own cars, or whatever to, I'm talking now pre-COVID, of course. Pre-COVID, what sort of proportion of our staff were using private cars to come to the Guildhall or the Civic Centre or wherever they happen to be based? Do we know why they used cars? In other words, had they considered alternatives such as walking, cycling, or use of public buses or whatever? And how, in a sense, do we promote? I mean, I see in paragraph 310, one of the recommendations under the Business Travel Review is, quote, promoting walking, cycling, and so forth. How to do that? But in order to do it, I think we first need to understand why people don't do it. And obviously, as part of that, to establish what proportion of staff currently are either walking, cycling, or using bus transport to and from their place of work. And then how do we promote that more amongst those who are not doing that? Because clearly that's, whatever the outcome in terms of a post-COVID situation is, if we ever get to such a thing as a post-COVID situation, home working, obviously, I suspect is going to form an important increased part of the post-COVID working structure. But nevertheless, there will still be people needing to get to and from the Guildhall or wherever. So how do we promote walking, cycling, and so on? I think we need some data, maybe a survey of staff to establish how they currently get to and from work. What would they think about a walking, cycling alternative, and so forth? What are the obstacles in the way? Maybe they feel they just live too far away. Maybe they think that cycling on our roads is too dangerous, or whatever it might be. But I think we need more data to try and create a basis for informing staff how they can get to and from their place of work more safely, more sustainably by walking and cycling than at present. Sorry for rambling a bit there, but I think there's some real issues in there. Thank you.
Okay. Stuart, you'd like to answer that question?
Yeah, certainly cover on some of the points on there. I think it's quite a while ago since there was a staff travel plan done for the existing sites within the council. I think in the past they were done, but some number of years ago. When the kind of new locations and possible hub and city centre and things are being considered, there'll have to be a staff travel plan going forward with that. And I guess potentially if we do have a move from, say, the Civic, it may well be that parking won't be something that we'll be able to provide for staff. So I guess you then end up with in the situation where there's more of a stick than a carrot to sort of, it sort of discourages people sort of driving in. So, looking to the future of things like that. We've obviously got we've been the most successful in terms of in Wales in securing funding for improving our networks, the active travel networks, and so a heck of a lot of cycling infrastructure has been going in, walking and cycling infrastructure, along with a significant sort of promotion campaign which will be ongoing in terms of for that. The other kind of incentives are things like the cycle to work scheme and things where staff have been encouraged. It's open at certain times of the year to sort of encourage that take up. I think the other measures we've got are things like the review of the grey fleet, the staff travel, because some staff, for example, currently because of the arrangements for staff travel, if they need to get around with work, they need to have their car in work to be able to then go out for the purposes of work. But if we've got a very, a really well managed sort of system where they're not going to be left without a vehicle, it isn't the case that someone's taken the van or the car and they can't get around to do their job. If we know we've got a really kind of well-managed system in place, then it'll give them that confidence. I guess the other things which have been there as incentives is there's been kind of discount schemes which have been running with First Cymru in terms of for staff travel on the buses. Kath's on the call. She could very briefly probably touch on that if you wish, just to say what that scheme entails. Kath, could you just remind me of the nature of that scheme?
Yes, funny enough, I was just in the process of typing something in the chat bar as you said my name. Yeah. Yeah, there is. We've had it for quite a number of years. Travel discount scheme for staff for bus services in conjunction with First Cymru, where staff can either buy daily tickets. They're like vouchers, which they sort of you scratch off the date you're going to use them and that, and they get 20% discount on the normal daily Swansea Bay ticket, which is quite good. And the other one is that they can purchase an annual bus ticket, season ticket, and we get a discounted rate, and staff can pay for that monthly through their salary, through salary deductions. So rather than have to pay up front for the whole thing, they pay monthly through salary deductions. So those have both been going for quite some time.
Yeah. Thanks, Kath. So I guess, there have been, a number of measures. I guess the battle is to keep that in the line of sight, I guess, for staff, which is an ongoing sort of challenge. But I think certainly ahead with the impetus for the kind of the grey fleet review and the review of accommodation, I think it does give us a wider opportunity, and particularly with the greater amount of infrastructure going in as well for cycling and walking, I think we're in with a strong chance. And I guess the other thing which lies ahead is that kind of the early development stages of the kind of South West Wales and Swansea Bay Metro are underway, and that will certainly be looking at how we really kind of improve the alternative travel modes for which will obviously be an offer for staff as well in terms of on there. It's how we get really good on the integration between cycling, walking, bus and rail in terms of on there, and we sort of review and improve the networks and the accessibility.
Could I just add, Chair, very quickly? Thank you for this discussion, very informative. Should we actually be trying to encourage staff to look for alternatives to private car use, obviously using the sustainability argument, drawing attention to the climate consequences of fossil fuel cars, and trying to encourage staff into an alternative non-car culture? Sorry, yeah, whoever.
I think that's certainly something which can be considered. Maybe it's something that the committee wants to put forward in terms of as to a recommendation to encourage it, and it's certainly something which I don't know, Councillor Thomas, I'm not sure if you want to comment in terms, but it's certainly a recommendation that could be put forward for consideration. I guess one of the challenges, along with many things, is the amount of the sort of amount of resource we've got to develop those things. But it's certainly something which the committee could recommend, I'm assuming.
Yeah, if I could, Chair, sorry, just because Stuart mentioned. Yeah, I mean, that's what hopefully these are the very things that we'll be looking to the committee to put as a recommendation as part of this. Yeah, everything's got a challenge, but unless we try, we won't get anywhere. So we certainly, you're pushing against an open door here. We're willing to look at any considerations put forward by the committee on this. So I would be happy to look further into that, definitely.
Thank you, Mark. Phil, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. From one Phil to another, I was going to ask, is it a time frame for a report to come back to us to look at? And then just a comment on Kath's explanation about using public transport. And if we encourage our employees to come by bus, etc., then we will have to have something in place, because we're looking at the grey fleet. So we're looking at employees who come into work, but then they're out and about. So we've either got to have a very good pool system, because if, for argument's sake, somebody enjoys coming in by bus, but then has got to come out to Pontylice, we'll have to arrange a meeting for a Monday for them to walk there by Wednesday. So we've got to have something in place that encourage the people to come by bus, or if they live in within, if they're as fit as Peter, can cycle in from Pontylice and home. Don't forget to go home as well.
Yeah. I'll just come in on that one just to say, yeah, absolutely. That's at the heart of the kind of grey fleet review. Really, is having the appropriate measures in place. It's sort of acknowledged that the pool current sort of, for example, pool car usage, although the current pool car offer we've got is quite limited. It's not always easy to book. It's sometimes, it's not as joined up as it could be. So, and some of it involves the need for, people pre-planning journeys, limiting the number of journeys as well. It's, I guess, just making sure that people aren't in sort of patterns that they go out every day because they've always gone out every day, and they, where they could sometimes bunch journeys, they could plan them ahead. But it is a case of having the facilities available where, we've got overspill, and some of the discussions we've had relating to car clubs and things have been possibly working with some of the hire car companies, for example, that the car club offer means that you've got a wider pool of vehicles available. So it's certainly something, and not just car club vehicles, but it's also, for example, the bikes, possibly electric bikes. It might be some of it in terms of public transport, that awareness and information in terms about that. So it's about having it's about making sure that if you are encouraging alternatives, that it doesn't make work difficult, for people. It doesn't make it difficult for people to carry out their functions in an efficient and effective manner, really. So that's what we need to make sure.
I think also, Stuart, you talk of e-bikes there. If you go on to StaffNet, I'm sure we've got a thing with like Alfords that we can buy bikes with a discount.
That's right. It's open at certain times of the year. I think it'll be opening up again soon. It's sort of the Cycle to Work scheme, which has certainly had an amount of uptake, and they increased the sort of ceiling on that, so people, so it is affordable to actually buy an e-bike. And if I'm honest, I think the e-bikes, particularly with some of the topography of Swansea, I think is a welcome boost on some of those hills, really. So, but I think it'll be, relatively transformational in terms of for a journey perspective. And we just need to make sure that we are providing the infrastructure so that people feel confident and that it's safe for them to use, certainly for the less confident cyclists to use that infrastructure as well. So so I would imagine that will expand, and it will certainly give a sustainable offer, because I suppose there's always that tension about almost, the encouraging people to say just switch from a diesel or a petrol car to an electric car is not going to solve all the issues, because, for example, they still give off a lot of sort of microparticles in terms of from the tyres and things, which are not good for the environment. The brake pads, they still contribute to sort of that congestion. They're not the I guess they're not the sort of utopia for sustainability, really. I think it's other measures that need to be prominent.
Thanks, Stu. Mike White, to see your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. A couple of points if I could, Chair, if possible. I presume we were open to keep cars out of the city centre to have a greener city. But anyway, but I thought that was we perhaps was looking at. Secondly, in regards to the issue with cross travel and staff incentives, I know that we've obviously flagged this up previously, and looking at the all the Wales with rail and bus and like an Oyster card style system. But the issue we got in really within Wales is that we got different bus operators, and not all of them recognise the actual tickets that have been used, because we've had issues, I'm sure, not only myself but other members, where if you buy a ticket into the city centre, return ticket, you can only use it on first, because the likes of the other private coach companies that operate on certain services, who've obviously got been given the tender to run them, don't accept those tickets. So that's an issue really that we need all the operators on board. If you're going to have a system where it's going to be incentive there, where everybody gets the opportunity of using rail and bus travel, you know, to and from work. And also in regards to the actual cycling bays, at the moment, the only one that we have really where we've got is the Santander one, which is on the Civic Centre. You know, if you're going to obviously have staff in the city centre, we need to look at actual bike bays where we have the facilities for the people to park their bikes. That's another issue I think that we've got to really look at. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Mark, before you come in, Stuart, Mark is wants to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's quite timely Councillor White actually brought that up about the cross-ticketing, as it's referred to in the sort of trade. The being able to interchange tickets between different operators. So, as it is today, I've just taken a report has been approved at Cabinet this morning for us to accept extra funding from Welsh Government to look to support the bus companies, transport companies, not only in Swansea, but that's going to go right across the 22 authorities. Part of the acceptance of that money is that all transport operators will enter into dialogue with all the local authorities, Transport for Wales, Welsh Government, looking at setting up a partnership, more of a partnership arrangement. The key to that will be cross-ticketing. It's one of the key elements of that agreement, and not just cross-ticketing between operators or on buses, but truly cross-ticketing between rail franchises as well. So that's going to be, and that is desperately needed, and it is the way forward. And just finally, Councillor White also mentioned the other cycle hubs effectively. We are going to be extending them into around the quadrant and up at the train station, I believe. Stewart will correct me if I'm wrong on that, but we've certainly got plans to expand the facilities of cycle bays or cycle hubs as well, yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark, very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Stewart, do you like to comment?
Yeah, just reaffirming that. I think integrated ticketing, the Welsh Government have been absolutely clear that, and it is the only way to get sort of seamless networks and the integration between rail and across different operators. They're providing a lot of support to operators at the moment, but as a result of providing that support, they're quite rightly demanding that they're more compliant in terms of supporting some of the measures which are necessary. In terms of the hubs, it's clear we do need an expanded kind of higher network, whether it's through Santander or potentially another operator or whatever in there to bring some competition. But the other thing is we also, as part of the COVID recovery monies, we bid quite early on with a view to wanting to put much more high quality sort of cycle parking facilities and things in terms of if we're to try and encourage, for example, cycling, some of the parking is less than ideal, I think it's fair to say. And, some people have got a lot of money invested in cycles. So making sure that, that it's got that prominence in the city centre and other key locations is really important. So coming soon, there'll be some really good high quality sort of cycle parking, and including with the arena as well to show that it should be a mode of transport of choice, and that you will, in fact, have that sort of almost priority pass to places, and that's the only way it can become more normalised. I suppose when you look at European best practice and things, there's certainly not, your cycle parking isn't down a back street, a couple of hoops in the ground. It's given much more prominence. So I think that's on there. You did mention, sorry, your first question. It was I couldn't quite remember the first question.
Yeah, the first question was Stuart, was that we was open to keep cars out of the city centre.
Yeah, that's it. I had a complete mental blank there. What we don't want, I guess, is inappropriate sort of vehicle movements, and I think we've certainly the council's really made a statement with, for example, Kingsway, because what was happening was a heck of a lot of through traffic movements on the Kingsway, and you know, car movements have got, you know, a real detrimental effect to the environment, whether it's the sort of you know, noise and the pollution related to traditional vehicles, or just really the congestion and safety issues. So for example, the design speed of the Kingsway was 20 miles an hour. We've modelled it to sort of not wanting people to choose that as their route for through journeys when they're getting from east to west. Also, there's certain things like rationalising the car parks so that people aren't driving around to the small car parks in the back streets, and that they've got, you know, central points that are clear, and that it limits the number of kind of unnecessary journeys being performed. And you know, the other thing is making sure that the road space which has been taken up by vehicles is because they really need to be there, they have to be there. But there are other choices in terms of, you know, as I say, improved through things like the metro schemes, improved bus journeys, improved active travel. It's just trying to reduce down the unnecessary negative impact of sort of car journeys, really, and cars on the road, because it doesn't create a nice environment. And you know, the city centres and town centres are going to be under a lot of challenge, and they're going to have to be as pleasant an areas as possible ahead to sustain themselves and to thrive. So we have to move towards a kind of changed environment.
Thanks, Stuart. Kath, I see you made one comment in the slideshow. Can you comment in chat? That's what.
Yes, sorry. Sorry. Yes, in slideshow. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's just to say that we are conscious of the fact that the cycle hire facilities at the moment are quite limited. As you know, as hinted earlier, it's limited to sort of the seafront section, Mumbles, along through Civic Centre and down to the Bay campus and Park and Ride. And that's really because that scheme was set up through the university. The university entered a competition and they won funding from Santander to set that scheme up. So that scheme is obviously under their control, and the university have got their own ideas about where they want those cycle hire stations to be, because it suits them and the university. We have been looking at a wider scheme than that. We've been talking to the university about that, but what we've decided now is the best approach is that we as a council invite a tender for our own funded scheme, using funding that we've had from local transport grant funding, so that we can then decide where we think are the most appropriate points for cycle hire docking stations to be. So we just about literally, hopefully next week, the tender will be going out. So we'll see what, we've had a few expressions of interest, but we'll just see what happens now.
Thanks, Kath.
Okay. Okay.
Phil, if there's no other questions, can we go on to the final part, please?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Chair.
So this lights.
Moving on to street lighting then. This is a piece of work, the lighting replacement programme, which has been running for nigh on 10 years now. As part of that, we have replaced 74% of the current lighting estate with LED lighting. And then in addition to that, a number of dimmable high pressure sodium lanterns, which takes our total up to 88% in terms of environmentally friendly or more efficient lighting, if you like. We have set a target to try and capture the remaining emissions, if you like, and replace these other lights. But as it stands, the forecast is that we're doing between 0.5% and 1% per year, and that isn't really sustainable. And it's purely down to resources. In Swansea Council, the electricity consumption and the energy that goes into street lights is picked up by the Highways Department, and that also sits in the same pot of money, if you like, as the repair and replacement programme. And what's happening there is that as energy prices go up, that leaves less money for us to replace lights. So finance is a big challenge on that one.
I think what I'd emphasise as well in terms of on there, just to add to what Phil was saying, the cost of the columns. What we've done is the columns, the majority of the columns in the residential areas, which tend to be the slightly lower height columns, have had LED replacements. The ones that are left tend to be the ones on the major routes, and at the moment the lamps are much more expensive in terms of that, because the lighting levels that they have to give off are much higher, so they are much more expensive. I suppose it's a bit similar to the hydrogen vehicles. They were ridiculously expensive, and now they're just very expensive. So the hope is, as LED technology improves, is that we will be in a position to sort of be able to afford more replacements. But ultimately, I guess it's the question of prioritisation for the council as to the kind of investment versus the sort of gain from a wider replacement programme. Because a lot of money was invested in the street lights to carry out the large tranche of replacement, and I think it had an impact of saving somewhere in the region. Well, I think it was over £400,000 a year in terms of lighting energy charges. So at the time. So
thank you, Stuart. Have you finished your presentation, Phil? Sorry.
I just finished that off by saying that I think, as Stuart said, it's
okay. Go.
It's the recommendation.
Sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. The recommendation would be that we develop a street lighting policy for inclusion, which will look at how we address those remaining columns, and that would be over a period of time, and that would obviously have to include some kind of cost to saving ratio, because if these lanterns cost so much, then it may not be absolutely the best investment, but we'd look to fetch that back to yourselves as part of developing this policy.
Okay. Right, Mike, you got a question?
Oh. Yes, Chair. Thank you very much. Phil, what I'd like to ask is, about 15 years ago, the council at the time made a decision to cut all metal lamp columns down, but the half of them still left, half around the city, in different areas, leading in and out the city. What are the plans to have them removed?
Okay. Stuart or Martin have got their hand up.
Stuart.
All right. There's no plan in terms of replacing. Do you mean the removal of where they've been cut down to, the actual stub columns that have been left at the?
That's right, Stuart. Yes.
There's no plan for removal at the moment in terms of on there. What happened? There was the condition of the lighting network was quite. Some of the columns were in very poor structural condition, so they had to be cut down. There would be further cost in terms of for the removal of the rest of the columns and removing the electric supply completely because of the age, etc., the networks and the works involved. So there's no direct plan. The plan at the time was to, I guess, make them safe in terms of on there, and the areas where they were removed rather than columns replaced and LEDs or different lights put up was areas which at the time had been risk assessed for being, much lower pedestrian sort of movements and things. So I think it was done via a kind of a risk assessment approach. So that was, there's no plans to doing anything there at the moment. So. Okay,
and I certainly had comments of people who say, how long they've been there and what are the council's intentions to actually move them.
Thank you, Mike. June, you had your hand up first.
Yeah, thanks. Are there any areas in Swansea where we can reduce the energy usage by having timed on and off for the street lighting?
I think that's certainly something that we can develop through the policy. It's often controversial. I think it's fair to say. I think that's something that we need to put in. You know, as I say, the recommendation of the report is that we develop a kind of an LED policy as such. And I think the things we need to consider as well is, for example, when things like are there areas that the council would wish to consider to see either part night lighting. They do it on some sections of motorways and things. For example, they do it in some towns and cities where after a certain time they'll cut down. What we've got here at the moment is they dim down after a certain time when volumes go, but these are the options. And I guess the other things we need to consider is when we're putting in new estates, when we're going through the planning processes to put in new estates. At the moment, we're requiring street lighting to be part of it. The question is, from a sustainability perspective and from a, cost perspective and from a light pollution perspective, is that something we want to see ahead as do we want to put sustainability? These are sometimes, quite difficult, or but the decisions, but they're certainly things which need to be considered. So,
thanks, Stuart. Martin, you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think probably members have picked up individual examples of what we would like to include as part of this policy. The reality is anything involving street lighting, as we know historically, can be very sensitive. And notwithstanding the 40% reduction, the 4,000 tonnes of CO2, 60% reduction in the emissions over the last 10 years, there is still a sizable amount of emissions of 2,000 tonne per annum related to street lighting, and council collectively has agreed to get to net zero by 2030. So it has to be an area that needs to be included in the policy development. Perfect for this committee to assist with that. And I think it's about officers putting all of the options that are available in terms of any technical solutions that are out there, and then for members through that process to determine which of those they are prepared to take forward and recommend to Cabinet and for Cabinet to adopt. And ideally, we've set a target within the overarching strategy of around about 20%. But again, if you're able to make greater inroads here, you may not have to make as great inroads elsewhere. So I think it's just about that, us all having that open mind, which I know members will have, around all of the options. And finally, the policy, obviously a bit like the Green Fleet discussion, having one eye on future developments. Because I would imagine in 5 to 10 years, the technology in terms of street lighting will be different and hopefully improved over and above what it is now, in the same way as we talked about the Green Fleet. So I think it's that policy document being live enough to react to those changes and be able to have that longer term eye on the policy, as opposed to just the short term view, albeit it is very important that we look to address that shortfall in the next 3 to 4 years. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Martin. Peter, you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just quickly following on from this discussion about reduced numbers or reduced lighting, street lighting, and picking up on the point that June made a little while ago. This is something I'm very supportive of. I mean, clearly any sustainable programme for reducing the scale of street lighting is to be welcomed. I appreciate the possible sensitivities in some communities in relation to that, and obviously one has to be aware of those. But obviously alongside developing the LED programme, there has to be thought given to further reduction in overnight street lighting. There's another reason for that, of course, and I'll put my biodiversity hat on in relation to that. And that is, of course, that reducing overnight lighting can be helpful to some species of biodiversity. There's too much light overnight and we need to reduce it. And not just in relation to biodiversity, but in relation to dark skies. There is concern about the fact that in our cities and towns, including Swansea, I suspect, you cannot see starlight because the stars are obscured by overnight street lighting. So whilst I appreciate the sustainability arguments for LED and for reducing a street light. And we also need to bear in mind that there are biodiversity considerations, and I hope that that can form part, therefore, of a future strategic lighting replacement strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. Mike White, you still got your hand up, or is it old hand?
No, Chair, I'd like to come in on a point that Stuart raised about new housing developments. As you know, Stuart, under the current system, developers always got to adopt the roads, or they can put out the management company. I've certainly had one incident on a footpath where it was an argument over, was it the council's responsibility or was it the developer's responsibility? You know, but my main concern was getting that like let because it was on a public footpath. So is there anything that we can build into the policy, you feel, that we can tighten up on that with the housing developers?
I think it certainly should be covered in terms of on there. At the moment, as you say, the developers do have the option of either offering it up for adoption or not. But I know the Welsh Government have commissioned a kind of review into whether some estates should be, you know, whether more estates should be, for example, offered for adoption and make it more of a kind of a mandatory sort of situation. So I know the Welsh Government are looking into that at the moment. But you do end up with this confusion because even on, well, the difficulty is on estates which haven't been adopted is that the members of the public, you know, just if the light's out, then they assume it's the council in terms of that's responsible. So it is a real challenge, and I think it's a challenge in general on those non-adopted areas. So yes, a problem.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Phil, for your time this afternoon. I know this has been a long one. Right. Go back on the recommendations that we note or endorse the current green fleet. The PDC endorse the need to develop the grey policy. Item 3 was PDC endorse the need to develop the street lighting, and a further report to be presented to the PDC once the Welsh Government consultation on development of the new Wales transport strategy. Can we have an agreement that we do the recommendations?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Again, Phil, Martin, and Stuart, thanks for your time for coming this afternoon. All the other officers, Casway. We go into item agenda number 5, which is the work plan.
Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Our next meeting will be on the 18th of the 2nd, where we are having local and general, regional and economy recovery response, and what can the council do to encourage more shops and support high street regeneration. I don't think we good.
Chair, can I come in at that point? Are those items, could we ask Martin if they're both going to be available to come to the meeting? And if so, how big are they? Are we going to be able to manage them both in one meeting?
Right. Okay.
Yeah, happy to pick that up, Chair. Yeah, yes, they are both coming. They'll probably be a combined report because it'll be presented by the same team. But I believe that members had an earlier version of the economic recovery strategy at the tail end of 2019, and I think that was managed within the meeting. The High Street one is very much aligned to that. It's almost a case in point as to how is the economic recovery plan specifically looking at the area of High Street. So these meetings tend to be scheduled for an hour. We do very often run over the hour, unfortunately, but it's been a really good discussion today. But I would recommend we bring both items on that day, and officers are preparing the reports at the moment, and written reports will be provided in advance.
Thanks, Martin. Just going back before we close, gentlemen and ladies, the items that Peter Jones' suggestions, pool cars, cross-ticketing and cycle parking, and then on street lighting, develop LED policy. Martin, do we need to sit down as a group and discuss these? And if so, do we put in a time and a date to sit on a meeting to talk about these?
I think, Chair, if I may, I suspect some of those items, certainly some of them, will be captured in the recommendations of the report you've just approved. Right. What perhaps I could suggest is once officers have had a chance to discuss post-meeting to see whether any of those elements that are missing from that, then we'll bring it back to the committee to decide whether you want an extra item on that if it can't be incorporated into the existing plan.
Right. Okay.
Chair, if I may, I believe there's two hands up from Councillor Burtonshaw and Councillor Downing as well.
Yeah, okay. Ladies first, June.
Yeah, on the items coming to next committee, will it include the COVID impact on shops in Swansea, especially the high street?
Yes, it will, Chair. Yes.
Yes, June. The answer to that. And Phil Downing?
Yeah, I was going to ask similar to what you just said now, Chair, is we spoke about the grey fleet and we spoke about the lights, but we didn't, and I did ask about the time frame. We spoke about them, but we haven't spoken when they're going to come back to us. Yeah. To have a look, and because it's not just one meeting and we'll say, oh, this is how the policy is going to work. Could take a few meetings. I'm not saying take all the meetings, but it would take some time out of some meetings. Yeah. So when does it start then? I know it started today, don't say that, Martin, but but the next stage, how do we move forward?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. No problem at all. I guess it depends if the committee wanted to amend anything that's on the existing plan. For me, we've got items scheduled up until April. So we've got the next 3 months agenda items listed, and officers are working on those. I'd be minded to suggest that the first of those, and what we can do is discuss separately, as you've suggested, Chair, the order in which they come back, starting from May, if that suits the committee. And if you have a preference of which of those items you want to come first, the green fleet we've said is back end of the year, so that's okay. Yeah. So depending on which of the other two you want to come forward, I think they probably would be too big to deal within the same meeting, given the level of discussion we've had today. So I'd probably be suggesting one in May and one in June, depending on which order you'd like them.
Well, I think we'll go on the green fleet for May.
Sorry, grey fleet, Chair, sorry. Grey fleet?
Grey fleet for May. And June, then we can look at the LED policies for street lighting. Is that okay with the rest of the committee?
Yeah. That's fine, Chair. If there's any problem with that, I'll let the committee know at the next meeting, and but that's what we'll work towards.
Brilliant. Peter, is that an old hand up, or would you like to ask a question before we close?
It's a very new hand. Very new hand, Chair. Just quickly, on a matter of procedure, I would like to ask that when the proposed recommendations be circulated to the committee for approval before they're submitted, so that we're quite clear that we've captured everything that we think should be included in the recommendations. I mean, this is a procedure we adopt in scrutiny, and I think it's a good procedure to follow in relation to the work of this committee. So just a suggestion. I would like to see the recommendations before they formally go forward. Thank you.
Is that, I'd have to get, Phil, is that acceptable? You're being a vice chair doing this. You know, I know we have okayed things, then the next step, it goes on to cabinet. Do we interfere before cabinet?
Yeah, but any recommend? I think Peter's on about recommendations that come out of this meeting today.
Yes, yeah. That's right, Phil.
Yeah, but the point is, you know, nothing will be acted on that until we confirm them in the next meeting. I think that's right, Sam.
Yeah. Martin, when is the report due to go to Cabinet?
It's not following on from today.
Yeah, it's not for a while, is it?
No. The earliest would be probably, depending on progress made in May and June. We're looking at sometime September, October or beyond.
Okay, yeah, there we are. Well, I can keep a track on that. So when our minutes are approved at the next meeting, I'll put a little diary note down so I can make sure that it comes back in before it goes to Cabinet.
Brilliant.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That answers your question, Pete. Phil, do you want to come back? Is that all that an old hand? Thank you. And Paxton.
Unlike Peter, it's an old hand.
Yeah. Peter and June, are they old hands?
Joanne, I'm sure the officers, because this meeting's been recorded, can go through it and they'll pick up all the points we've raised anyway.
I think so. Thank you, June. Paxton?
Thanks, Chairman. I'm not sure whether we're asking, in fact, whether the draft report can come back to us before it's finally issued, so we can comment on it before it goes out. Is that what we're asking or not?
I think that's the same as what Peter was asking, but I think yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Just to reassure the committee chair, the reports would always come back to the PDC for the PDC to endorse before any recommendations are made to Cabinet. So we'll pick up both those angles. Anything that's come up specifically with today in terms of the recommendations, and then when we finally make a report available to Cabinet, it would come back by the PDC for sign off first.
Yeah, if there's no other questions, I know it's gone half hour over time. Thank you for everybody for their patience, and we'll see you on the next meeting, which is the 18th of the 2nd. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks.